Hello everyone, I'm back with another video. It's been I think 2 or 3 weeks since my last video because I got the bright idea that I wanted to add testing to the landing page. Not that it was absolutely necessary because this entire version of the landing page is temporary, but I thought it would be a good opportunity to one, learn how to test and refresh my memory for some things I had already learned how to test. But yeah, so for testing, I'm using Jest, React Testing Library, and Cypress for end-to-end tests. Now, the reason I'm using Cypress is because I originally tried using MSW, which is being used in one of the courses that I've taken in the past. Well, didn't finish it, but yeah, I've been doing it off and on. But the course is with just regular React, not Next.js. Um, this form has two API calls, and when it comes to that, you have to mock your API call. So I was like, all right, I'll just use MSW. For whatever reason, I could not get MSW to properly set up. I kept getting like an error, I think, whenever I'd run a test, something about the response, I want to say. It's been a couple weeks since I got that error and I pivoted to Cypress. But um, long story short, I found a few GitHub issues where others were having similar but slightly different but similar issues. And it came down to MSW version 2 does not play nice with Next.js. I saw people saying that they downgraded to version 1 point something or downgraded their Next.js version. I did see where somebody had like a hacky type of approach. It's some like file you have to add if you're using Next 15, and it was supposed to fix whatever was the problem with the Next 14 and MSW version 2 couldn't connect. But I'm not using Next 15. So I started to look into Cypress, and I had the question now with something like Cypress, do I still need MSW, or like basically would I be back to the same problem? And I found out that no, Cypress, I could test what I was trying to test on its own. So I was like, cool, so let me use that instead. The problem is I had to also learn how to use Cypress because I'd never used it before. Um, and the reason I had to use Cypress is I have two API calls. One checks that email block list, the list of like a bunch of temporary emails that I found, and it just checks to see if your email is the ending of your email is a part of that list, and also sending the name email pair to the early adopter list in Sanity if you pass all your validations. So I had to test that. And there's two asynchronous calls. And I remembered seeing in the docs that if you're trying to test async components or something like that, you have to use a end-to-end test for now when it comes to Next.js. I saw that in the beginning, but I assume because this is actually a client component inside of a server component that didn't apply, but it actually did apply. So yeah, so I just want to do like a quick run through of the tests that I made. I am by no means an expert. I'm still figuring out as I go, honestly. So if you see something that I could have tested or missed or could have done differently, put it in the comments. So the first file is waitinglistmanager.test.tsx. So the waiting list manager is this form and then this early adopter account. It's just a parent that holds these two because that's where the call is to get the current adopt account from Sanity. So this had to be a server component. Now, the only thing that I test is this holds, well, this is also a client component. This has the state because I need to be able to pass the state down to both components. So I had to make a parent for both these sibling components. So all this test does is just check if you increase the count, basically a user was added to the waiting list. Does this 5 turn into 6, basically? So up here, what I had to do was, so that I'm not using the actual waiting list component, I had to mock it to simplify it because again, because it has this form has those two API calls, I was back to the same problem when I just want to know, does this count increment? And I don't need to actually do the endpoint to find out if the incrementation works. So mock the component, and I added a button to click. There's this function on user added that's passed in as a prop to the waiting list form, and that's called on a successful response from the request to update Sanity. So I just basically mocked all this so that I could test that functionality in isolation. So I'm using the user event, which just simulates user interactions, basically. Targeting the button, and I added an add button, so by name, and this here is just a regex so that it's case insensitive. And then because this is dealing with state, you have to wrap it in an act, otherwise you'll see that act warning in your test file and it'll fail. So wrap in act, make it async, and then await for the user to click the button. And then once they click the button, check is the number 6 in the document. And waiting list manager is passing, so that test is passing. All right. The next file is the early adopter count, which is this component. It just has the initial count that we get read in from Sanity, and then the text early adopters. I have 2 tests for this one, just that it renders the initial count correctly because the initial count is passed in as a prop. And I just did, of course, render the component, pass in an initial count, and then test, make sure that that same count is in the document. And the second test is, this is conditionally rendered. So if the count is 0 or less than 0, this isn't displayed again because I didn't want to put 0 early adopters. I only wanted to show if I actually had at least one. So this test tests just that. Does not render the initial count if it is not greater than 0. So I made the initial count -5. And you have to use query by text if you want to find something that could be hidden per se, because get by text is only for things that are always available in the DOM. But since this won't actually be rendered, it won't actually be able to find the text if you use get by text. So you have to use query by text instead. And then the opposite of this, you expect it not to be in the document. So you just say expect count .not to be in the document. All right. The biggest test is this waiting list form. So again, I told you there's 2 API calls happening. So start from the top. The same on user added function that is called to increment the count, I mocked that. And then I made this, I learned this in that course. The course is by Programming with Mosh, by the way, if you want to get it. He had a 2-part course. It was learning how to test React as well as learning how to test just regular vanilla JavaScript. So go check that course out. Not sponsored, but I thought it was a pretty good resource because as you know, the testing resources for the front end are very scarce. So I've told a couple people about it and they've actually bought it. So I thought I'd pass it on. Anyway, he showed like a lot of things that you can do to refactor and so that you won't repeat yourself as much. I'm sure there's still some things I can do to refactor, but this was kind of like a first pass. So I don't know if you remember from here, I had this line render initial count. So at first I had this in every single test. And I realized, hey, I keep saying this over and over and over. So in this one, I made a render component function that renders. This is the same line that would have been used over and over and over. So anything else that I will find that I need in every test, you can actually make the function return an object. And so form, instead of having to say screen.getByRole form in every test, I just do it once here. And then when I go to use it, I destructure whatever I need and set it equal to render component to make my test a lot shorter. So this one, the first one, it just renders the form, make sure it's there, and then expect the form to be in the document. I will say one thing that I learned, this was failing at first, and I didn't understand because I'm literally using a HTML form element, but something about, I think, React doesn't recognize all the native elements. So you actually have to give forms an accessible name, so that it's recognized as being a form or having the role of form or something along those lines. So what I did is, actually, I'll just pull it up so you can see. Where's it at? Where's it at? Where's that? There it goes. All right, so here, area label, join the waiting list. So what I learned is a screen reader will actually announce what the name of the form is, which is good if you have more than one form on your page. That's how a screen reader user will be able to differentiate like what form it actually is, because 9 times out of 10, people will have forms and they won't actually have like a title per se. So that's why. So yeah, this one just tests that I rendered the form. This one tests that I render the name field with label. So here, same similar thing, destructure the 2 things that I need and expect them to be in the document. And then just to make sure for accessibility purposes, you want to make sure that they have the name attribute. I think if you don't, you're supposed to be able to click the label and it'll, I hate that my Bitwarden thing shows up for inputs, which is kind of annoying. There we go. If you click the label, it's supposed to automatically select or put focus to the input that it's tied to. But you have to make sure that it has a name, because the name and the ID are supposed to match. So pro tip. All right. The next test is renders the name field with focus. So by default, I went ahead and put the focus on this field just to save a little time. I don't know, thought it was a nice touch. I've never done that with the form before, so I don't know, it may come in handy later, so I just kind of put it in there. The next, similar to the name, renders the email field with label. Similar things. Next one, render submit button with stay informed text. So this, oh, I don't actually test for the text. So render component, expect submit to be in the document. I did not finish this. So I can also say expect to have text content, stay informed. Bam, there we go. The next one should display an error if validation fails. So if I, for example, leave this blank, I have a list of errors that I get from Zod. And so it maps through all these errors one by one and displays any of them that are a match, basically. So destructure what I need. I need the user to simulate hitting the stay informed button. I await the user because we're doing something with the state potentially. And then user.type is just simulating the email input. They're typing their name. And for this one, I'm testing no name, basically. So that's why they're only typing in the email input and skipping the name, which that is the error that I'm just making sure that in error. I don't care about the specific error in this test per se. I just care about that an error is displayed under the button. I gave this, I can't remember what you call it. What do you call it? Oh, a role of alert for the error. So basically I'm checking, is this present? If it is, it means that the error length is greater than 0 and there's something in this box. So that's what I'm testing for that. Yeah, here we go. Screen I found by role alert, and then you take it one step further. you check that the error items. So I didn't know about this, but there's this within function where you can look inside of an element, because sometimes something will fail just because it's not the outermost component, it's nested, and sometimes tests will miss it apparently. So you can use the within to look inside of something. But yeah, and then I'm just testing that the length of the error items is greater than 0. All right, this is a test that I commented out. I think I was trying to test submitting the form. I think this was one of the tries before I started messing with MSW or whatever. I didn't want to delete it because I could use some of this for later, so I just commented out. Another thing that I tested is, so those are component tests, but I actually have, I'll close these just to save space. Unit tests, I have 2 util files. Why? There we go. So my waiting list schema is my Zod, the name of my Zod validation. Where is it at? Yeah, here. So this is my waiting list schema. So these are all of the conditions the Zod is looking for, which creates this list that's shown if there's an error, basically. So I realized instead of like filling out the form all these different ways, you could just test the schema itself, and then it makes testing the form a little simpler. This is something else that I learned from that course. It's called parameterized test. So what you can do is basically think of it as a loop. You give these like conditions. So it's an array where you have the things that you're going to be checking. So instead of manually typing John Doe or with the correct email or no name and a wrong email, like all these different cases, you can just think of them one time, write them down, and then you can add an expect in the loop basically, and it will pass in all of these conditions. Think of them like variables to a parameter to a function kind of. So all these, typo. So this %s will substitute should pass with valid input, name, I think it says name, John Doe, and then email. Yeah. So expect valid input to not throw. So this is expecting. So when you use Zod, and like when I just hit stay informed with blank name and email, Zod throws an error basically. But if you have valid input, it does not throw an error, and whatever's under your validation will run. So for this test, I'll go ahead and save that typo. You expect it not to throw. So what this does is it goes expect and then passes in the valid input. So the name and email is like a pair. It'll run 2 identical tests for these inputs basically. The next one is for invalid input for the name, and basically what I did was all these I thought of like scenarios for each one of these. So I have an email but with no name, a blank name, and then an email, a valid email, I should say, a name with just spaces and a valid email, an invalid name and a valid email. I cap it at 40 characters, so I repeated it 41 times, so it would be 1 character too many, and a valid email. And then this one basically says should fail with invalid name, and then it goes by all these, whatever's in the curly braces basically is substituted in this %s, and it's going to run this expect for all these cases basically. And then I do the same thing for email. So the constant would be, of course, it's a valid name. I only care about the email. So no email, invalid email. There's no period because I also test for the format of the email. Example.com is one of the email endings I explicitly test for, because I'm notorious for using example.com if I'm like manually testing something, especially at work. Test.com is another one. And then any no reply email, because the whole point of this is for me to be able to send you an email one day. And then I think I also test for a couple variations of no reply. And then just invalid email structure. It should be something at something dot something. And then same thing, it substitutes anything inside the curly braces. And then runs it one by one into the expect function. All right. Which it seems like a lot, but once you get the hang of it, this saves you so much time rather than literally having a test for each of these and going one by one. You do this once, run it, and then you're good to go. Also be easy when you want to like add a separate case, just add it here, update it, and you're good. All right. The next one is the block list. So the block list is just a text file, I think. And so it reads in the text file and compiles it into a list. And then basically it checks if the email that the user tried to submit, if the ending of that email matches any of those email endings in that list, it fails the validation and it returns back an error, of course. So I did the same thing, parameterized test. I mocked it basically. I just made it, it uses a set of 2 fake emails. And so I did the same thing like I did in the wait list schema test. So incorrect email, and then, this function returns a Boolean for true or false. Either it passes or it doesn't. So that's what this Boolean is here. And then this is a description. And so this I actually pass in 3. So if you have anything separated by commas, or the other one I had, the curly braces, it'll substitute like this first chunk will go here. This Boolean will go for this one. And then this description will be substituted for this last %s. And so if you have an error, for example, it'll print out the description so you know which one of these actually failed. But when it passes, you have no idea which one. You just know that they passed, basically. But yeah, same concept. An email that I know is going to fail, meaning true, it is on the list. This one is also got the same ending. It's going to fail. going to be true. This one is going to be false because Gmail is a valid email and it's considered a safe domain. And then one thing that I didn't account for at first was some people just like to type in all caps for whatever reason. So I had to make sure that my test was case insensitive, because mailinator in all caps and mailinator in lower caps actually would not match before. And so that was a bug that I found. I will say, even though testing or learning how to test and writing the test for it, and this is just a simple landing page, like it's so many files and it just took so long. But I will say I uncovered bugs I never thought about. And I feel like it kind of made this, even if it's just a little simple landing page, made it a lot more robust. All right, so this is already actually running. So I have 5 test suites and 26 tests pass, and then 100%. So now I'm going to kill this and we're going to go to Cypress. I only have 1 test file for Cypress because only thing I wasn't able to test with Jest and React Testing Library was the waiting list form, because I had the API calls and it was asynchronous. So what I was trying to do basically with MSW was mock those 2 API calls. So what you can do with Cypress is they have this intercept call, which essentially does the same thing. You're basically making a fake API endpoint. You're giving it the the status code that you want it to return, and you also can give it the body that you want it to return. And the way it works is, so this one is only one. I just have like the same 2 fake emails similar to the other test I just showed you. But this intercept is trying to send the name email pair to Sanity. If you want to test different conditions, you can put if statements basically, because all you're doing is making sure that the API endpoint handles the right condition. For example, like it handles success and it's supposed to do something. You're testing to make sure it did that something. It fails. You're making sure it did something. You got a 500 error or whatever. You're making sure it did what it was supposed to do. And so to mock that, essentially, I have this if, else. So for this one, I want to simulate the user entering an email that is already on the waiting list. So I gave it a dummy email, exist.gmail.com, so that in my test, I'm able to type that in basically. And in my mock, it's saying, hey, if this email is a match, give it a 400 code, and this email is already on the waiting list, and it'll be displayed down here. And then to simulate that the server error does what it's supposed to do and displays internal server error under here, you give another email, for my case anyway, to match. And then otherwise, it was a success, and you get the success message that you're on the list. So I just made this mock APIs function just to make it a little cleaner, so that my before each didn't have to be so big. So before each test, it calls mock APIs because, to my understanding, it has to know about the endpoints first. And then you visit localhost, which is the home page, because this is only just a landing page for now. And then my first test should add a user to the waiting list on successful submission. So I target the 2 inputs, and then I simulate the user typing, and you check that the button has the right text. And then you also simulate clicking the button. You have to wait for the endpoint. The load block list is the first one. And this as here, whatever you put as the as is what you can call like a function here. So load the block list first. And then if that passes, then you call waitlist submit to see which one of these cases are true and to see what response you get back. And then for this one, this was a successful submission. So it would be this one here, a status code of 200. And then the area live polite is, I don't know if you remember seeing it, but in the form, there's, I think, a paragraph tag, and it has area live polite, which means the screen reader won't like announce it like an alert. It will announce it, but it won't be like super aggressive like the alert will be. It'll kind of say basically, hey, successful submission. All right, so you're testing that that paragraph contains the text you're on the list that you should have gotten here from this endpoint. The next one should show an error if email is already on the list, which would be this exist.gmail.com, which if you see here, this is why I type in exist.gmail.com, because my endpoint already, I'm mocking this endpoint already being in the list. Similar to the other one, type name and email, click the button, load both, and then you can specify what the response is. So I want to make sure the response is 400, which is here, and the text, this email is already on the list, should be displayed. So the error list is the unordered list. I have, I think, an ID, and I call that error list. So first I check that the error list exists, meaning it will only exist if the list of errors is at least 1, meaning something failed, and I should see red text basically. And then you checking that the error list contains this email is already on the waiting list. Because this is a list of items, you're checking that it at least has one of those things in it. All right, and the last one is it should show an error if the API fails, which server error. So some other thing happens. Say API call failed or whatever, you'll get a 500 error. So this guy, you can specify again the status code of 500. So same thing, typing in that server error email so that it will specifically match to that mocked response that I want. Click the button, load the block list, and then here I can specify that the status code should be 500, and then the error list should contain internal server error. All right, so now I'm going to run Cypress so you can see. I think it's Cypress open. There we go. Yep. All right, I hope you can see this. I'm recording one screen. I just don't know if it'll show something else. But anyway, so this is the interface that you see when you run Cypress open. This is an end-to-end test, but Cypress can also do component testing. So you click it. I'm using Chrome. Start EDE testing in Chrome. Now it's going to open another window in Chrome. And waiting list form. So this is the only test that I have. So it was actually pretty cool to watch. You click it and you can watch it simulate your user typing and whatever your tests are. So these are my 3 tests. Should add a user to the waiting list. Should show an error if the email is already on the list. Should show an error if the API fails. One thing I did try to test was that the button is disabled and the text changes to submitting, which I know it does. It's just for whatever reason, I noticed in the simulation that the button never actually says submitting. I think if you can like hover over each step to see what happens. And here, this fetch call, now it says submitting, and the other fetch call still says submitting. But when it was running, if you notice, you never actually saw that. And I just could not figure out how to target that. I know what's happening. And if you click on this, it's weird. It's like almost like things happen out of order or something. I don't know. I tried for like a day or two and I just cannot figure out why the simulation just kind of skips over this part. But it's like a minor detail to me because I'm testing if the success message is there, which only happens after the button was disabled and after the test goes to submitting. Like that's not necessarily taken away from the test. I want to know, did I get the end goal that I wanted of submitting submitting the form basically. So if anybody has any idea why in like the simulation of running this test, you don't actually see this like loading state for the button, which in real life, it probably takes like 3 seconds or so on my computer anyway. So it's not like it's so quick you never see it. It just does not do it in the test, and which in turn made checking for that, it made it fail, and I just did not know why. So yeah, if anybody has any ideas with Cypress, how you can like pick out that specific moment. I tried to add like a timer or something, or like wait for these 2 endpoints, but it's almost like you've already gotten the success before you even get to calling the endpoint or something. Like, I don't know. I couldn't understand it. Calling the endpoint is the handle submit for this button. So when you hit handle submit, you load the block list first and do that check. Then you do the Zod validation and all that, and you finally pass in your valid input into the second endpoint to see, is it a unique email or is it already on the list? But yeah, so that's what I have been up to, and that's what has taken me so long. Moving forward, I'm probably going to build out a good amount and then double back to testing a little after the fact, just because testing kind of took so long. It's not the most exciting thing to do. And I kind of want like a little bit of the reward of like making more progress, because I definitely didn't think that February 18th, I would still just have a landing page. So, but yeah, stay tuned for the next video, and thanks for watching.